never forget Passover in 1990. I was a first-year student in rabbinical school, living in Jerusalem, and a family that I'd been tutoring in English invited me to celebrate Passover with them. It was so special that year to celebrate Passover, read from the Haggadah, not only in Israel, but in the sacred city of Jerusalem, and with a family that had 3 generations living together. It was my pleasure that night to realize that all of us were able to celebrate and drink the 4 cups of wine because we were living in an era where Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, existed. We are fortunate here in North America to live in a community that allows us to celebrate our Judaism openly. And we are so very fortunate to live in a time when the state of Israel exists. My sense of Jewish peoplehood and the importance of Israel was never the same after that. I wish you a very sweet Passover.
One of the ways that I have felt free during Passover was actually last year. It reminded me in this moment of our pandemic at the very beginning how Passover is meant for innovation and how we are free to think widely and greatly of how to make Passover meaningful to us year after year after year. And we do this by adding to our Seder plates. We add an orange, we added tomatoes. One year we added a black sweatshirt. And last year we added a computer as a way of being able to zoom into our family and friends and celebrate this foundational story in our tradition. So this year I am feeling free to add more symbols to our Seder plate, and I invite you to do the same.
A time when I appreciated my freedom came 8 years ago when I was living in Jerusalem. I was a junior in college at Cal, and I decided to study abroad for the year at Hebrew University. Now, I had grown up in Los Angeles in a Reform temple very similar to Peninsula Temple Sholom. I didn't realize that in more traditional communities, women and men don't have equality in their prayer and their Jewish ritual. When I got to Jerusalem and I told people that I was a Reform Jew, they often laughed at me or didn't understand what I meant. When I told people that I knew already then that I wanted to become a rabbi, they really laughed at me, and I had this feeling often that people felt I was ridiculous. During my year in Jerusalem, I decided to take an internship at Women of the Wall, a nonprofit organization that fights for women's right to pray at the Western Wall. With Women of the Wall, every month we would have a Rosh Chodesh service. We would gather together, linked hand in hand. We would pray, we would dance with the Torah, and often Women of the Wall, the women with us, were arrested for this because it wasn't allowed. That year taught me how lucky I am to have grown up in a progressive Jewish community where I took for granted the fact that women and men can do everything together when it comes to Judaism, where I took for granted the fact that I could grow up and become a rabbi.
The first time I recall understanding what my freedom allowed, or when I really appreciated being free, was when I voted in my first presidential election in 1988. Growing up, I was taught that voting was sacred, a privilege and a freedom that others fought for so that I would have the right to vote. And I remember in the 80s and 90s, getting young people to vote was a movement. I remember watching candidates on MTV and the MTV newscasters talking about all the issues. I was in my second year of college and recall getting in a long line, eagerly and nervously awaiting to cast my first vote. I felt emotional, remembering that many fought for this freedom. And when I was done, I proudly wore my I voted sticker. I remember the energetic vibe and how we wanted to be heard. We wanted to be a part of making a difference in the world. I see voting as the most basic building block of our democracy. Americans have shown that we're willing to go to great lengths to defend our freedoms and to vote for our beliefs. And ideally, freedom has meant the ability to choose, to educate myself, and to be responsible. Freedom has allowed me to always cast my vote.
In every generation, the person must feel like he came forth from Egypt. There was a moment I most appreciated my freedom. It was when me and my parents finally left the former Soviet Union. My parents wanted to study Torah and Hebrew and were caught by KGB. For a few years, they were so-called refuseniks and could not live normal life. I felt finally free when we landed in Israel. In America, we have a lot of freedom taken for granted. But there is still a lot of work to do. During this Pesach, every one of us should feel like Moses asking Pharaoh to let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Happy Pesach, everybody.